وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يده، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما، إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير مع حاجة بي إليه عظيمة، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم أن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي. اطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك، وأريتني من قدرتك، وعرفتني من إجابتك. فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أقطع عني عتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أقطع عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك علي يا رب. إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتمرض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك. فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل، وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك، مجري الفلك، مسخر الرياح، فالق الإصباح، ديان الدين، رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق، باسط الرزق، فالق الإصباح، ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى، وقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده. قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة منقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه ولا يغلق بابه ولا يرد سائله ولا يخير آمله. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. الحمد لله قاصم الجبارين مبين الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في ثمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي. حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه واعزز به وانصره وانتصر به وانصره نصرا عزيزا وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخفي بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم البم به شعثنا، واشحب به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغن به عائلنا، واقض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعطنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآله، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله، وبضر تكشفه، ونصر تعزه، وسلطان حق تظهره، ورحمة منك تجللناها، وعافية منك تلبسناها، برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم برحمتك في الصالحين فأدخلنا، وفي عليين فارفعنا، وبكأس من عين معين من عين سلسبيل فاسقنا، ومن الحور العين برحمتك فزوجنا، ومن الولدان المخلدين كأنهم لؤلؤ مكنون فأخدمنا، ومن ثمار الجنة ولحوم الطير فأطعمنا، ومن ثياب السندس والحرير والاستبرق فألبسنا، وليلة القدر وحج بيتك الحرام وقتلا في سبيلك فوفق لنا، وصالح الدعاء والمسألة فاستجب لنا، وإذا جمعت الأولين والآخرين يوم القيامة فارحمنا، وبراءة من النار فاكتب لنا، وفي جهنم فلا تغلنا، وفي عذابك وهوانك فلا تبتلنا، ومن الزقوم والضريع فلا تطعمنا، ومع الشياطين فلا تجعلنا، وفي النار على وجوهنا فلا تكببنا، ومن ثياب النار وسرابيل القطران فلا تلبسنا، ومن كل سوء يا لا إله إلا أنت بحق لا إله إلا أنت فنجنا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إني أسألك أن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في الأمر الحكيم من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل أن تكتبني من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم المشكور سعيهم المغفور ذنوبهم المكفر عن سيئاتهم، وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية وتوسع في رزقي، وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به بدينك ولا تستبدل به غيري. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عني شهر رمضان أو يطلع الفجر من ليلتي هذه ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. إلهي وقف السائلون ببابك ولاذ الفقراء بجنابك، ووقفت سفينة المساكين على ساحل بحر جودك وكرمك يرجون الجواز إلى ساحة رحمتك ونعمتك. إلهي إن كنت لا ترحم في هذا الشهر الشريف إلا من أخلص لك في صيامه وقيامه، فمن للمذنب المقصر إذا غرق في بحر ذنوبه وآثامه. إلهي إن كنت لا ترحم إلا المطيعين فمن للعاصين، وإن كنت لا تقبل إلا من العاملين فمن للمقصرين. إلهي ربح الصائمون وفاز القائمون ونجا المخلصون ونحن عبيدك المذنبون، فارحمنا برحمتك واعتقنا من النار بعفوك، واغفر لنا ذنوبنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الطيبين الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Assalamu alaikum, brothers, sisters, and respected Maulana. As you guys have probably seen in the news, there's been a lot of immigration enforcement, and I think many in our communities are concerned. And so I just wanted to give a quick presentation on your rights, trends, and other considerations that we should take into account. By way of background, I'm an immigration lawyer. I mostly do business and investor immigration, so we mostly deal with companies and investors, but I have a pro bono practice that deals with a lot of Shia asylum cases, so I have exposure to this other area of immigration law as well. I've been doing it for 6 years at large firms in LA, and now back home in Miami. Next slide, please. So this is just a preview of what we'll go over today. There's 4 kind of main areas. There's the enforcement regime. It's good to know kind of the background and who we're dealing with. Individual concerns, organization concerns, and overall Shia concerns. Just things outside the scope of immigration that we're seeing and we're dealing with as Shia lawyers. Next slide, please. And I know it's Friday evening, so we'll try to keep this 20, 30 minutes. I'll leave some room for questions at the end if anybody has questions, as I'm sure there will be. So these are the main agencies we, as Americans, would deal with, especially when dealing with immigration. So we have the Department of Homeland Security. This was an umbrella organization created after 9/11. And under that organization, we have Immigration and Customs Enforcement. That's probably who you hear about a lot in the news. But we also have Homeland Security investigations, and what I'm seeing on my end is HSI, Homeland Security Investigations, is a lot more involved, especially in the workplace raids, but more in also in some of these national security cases that we're seeing. And then last is U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS. If you are not a green card holder or a citizen and you're filing a petition, or you're filing a petition for your relative who's abroad, whether it's a family-based petition, a business or employment-based petition, or investment-based petition, you're filing with USCIS. And then we also have the U.S. Department of State, which is headed by our former Senator Marco Rubio, Department of Labor, and local and state law enforcement. Now we're seeing the Trump administration kind of co-opt local and state law enforcement. I know the city of Hialeah is cooperating with the Trump administration, and so you might have to deal with local and state law enforcement. Hopefully not, inshallah, but worst case. Next slide, please. So this is kind of the overview of enforcement of the new administration. Some of this is from my own observations over the last 50, 60 days. Some of this is from my observations over Trump 1.0, the first administration. And then, this is also some speculation kind of just based on what we've seen with trends, right? So first, big picture, enforcement action is expected to increase. In 2018 with Trump 1.0, ICE raids were kind of on hold for 10 years and they were brought back. In fiscal year 2020, so the government fiscal year runs from October 1st to September 30th, right? So in the last fiscal year of the Biden administration, there were about 400 immigration-related enforcement actions. With the Trump administration, we're expecting at least 12 to 15,000. That was the goal in the last year of the Trump administration. That's probably even going to be surpassed, and we're maybe closer to 20,000. So, that's a pretty exponential increase. Recent picks also point to a more hardline approach than last time, which Stephen Miller, Tom Homan, Marco Rubio, and Kristi Noem. I'm sure you've read about them in the news, but kind of just seeing the statements of these individuals, we can see a more hardline approach. And it's a bit different than last time. We're not seeing as much of a pushback on what we call skilled employment-based immigration, and I'm sure many people in the crowd here came in on an L visa, H-1B, things like that. That's considered skilled immigration, but against our community, we are starting to see a little bit more enforcement, and in general against what we call illegal immigration or undocumented people, we're seeing more enforcement and a more hardline approach. So here's just some of the laws. I won't bore you, but an important one is the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986. This is the law that allows ICE to enforce workplace immigration enforcement. So if you have an ICE raid sometimes, or if you have an I-9 audit, this is the law that gives them the authority to do so. What are the protections? Now, the U.S. Constitution provides protections under the Due Process Clause, which is found in the 5th and 14th Amendments, and that prohibits deprivation of life, liberty, or property by the federal and state governments without due process of law. And why that's important, you'll see there's a difference in treatment at the border, which includes the airports, on the port if you're coming from a cruise ship, or if you're flying in from Ziyarat, versus being in the United States, sitting at IJ, right? There's a difference in legal treatment at those two places. And then Fourth Amendment search and seizures, this prevents the government from just walking into your house without a warrant, right? This is a very important part of our Constitution, and alhamdulillah, we live in a country that does have constitutional protections. The exception though, and we'll go over that in a bit, is the border. And again, the border is not just the southern border with Mexico or the northern border with Canada. The border is also defined as Miami International Airport when you're coming in through customs on an international flight. And lastly, the doctrine of consular non-reviewability. This was most recently upheld in Kerry versus Dean. Essentially, due process does not extend to the consular decision. So if someone files a case to USCIS for their brother, their sister, or for an employee, it's denied based on the erroneous application of law. You can appeal it to the federal courts, and technically, in theory, you can take it to the Supreme Court. You can't do that with consular decisions. And why that's important is that, let's say you have a relative who wants to visit you on a B visa, on a visitor visa. They went on ziyarat, and the consulate just doesn't like the fact they went to Iraq or Iran and they denied them, which we see all the time. You can't really appeal that. There's no due process there. And so how does that work out in practice is we kind of see DOS as a rogue agency. So Department of Labor and Department of Homeland Security, which are the two of the big three agencies we're dealing with, they can be controlled. They do make bad decisions and they step outside their bounds, but that can be fixed through the court system. Alhamdulillah, our court systems still work pretty good. The Department of State, we don't have that ability. There's some things you can litigate. The Department of State, I do what's called mandamus action. So if you have a family member who's stuck in what's called administrative processing, we sue Department of State and federal court to get a decision, but we can't compel a certain decision, and we can't appeal bad decisions. And this is just long-held case law, Supreme Court case law, that the consulates are not subject to the jurisdiction of U.S. federal courts. Next slide, please. So first we'll go over some individual concerns that you all should have as individuals and protection. So these are just some articles we've seen in the news lately. Mahmoud Khalil, we'll talk about him in a little bit. We have an Iranian student that was picked up in Alabama, and they didn't really get much news traction until recently. And so I'm of the opinion that Iranian students are going to be one of the first groups that kind of get the hammer, especially if US-Iran relations continue to deteriorate, and we have a lot of Iranian students here. And then there's just some more articles about the students, and as you've seen, that's in the news nowadays, right? Student protesters getting picked up for things they've said or done. Next slide, please. So this is the big question from the community I'm getting. This is the list of countries that was leaked to the New York Times for a proposed Trump travel ban. As you can see, there are 3 levels of countries, and we have countries here where members of our community are from or that visit, right? We have Iran, we have Yemen, we have Pakistan on the second list. We should give a lot to our brothers and sisters from Lebanon and Iraq. They made it off the list, I don't know how, but thank God. And so the question I'm getting is, hey, if I'm from this country or my spouse is from this country, should I travel there? And it really is going to depend. And we'll go over the 4 buckets in a little bit, and I'll go through my analysis of why you shouldn't travel. But just take a look at this list. If there's a country of interest from you, remember it, because it'll be important later. Next slide. So these are the immigration buckets. Everyone in this building falls into one of these 4 buckets. You're either undocumented, which is commonly referred to as being illegal. You are a non-immigrant, so most people here that weren't born in the United States came in on a non-immigrant status. That's essentially a temporary status, a B visa, an H-1B worker visa, an L-1 visa. There's permanent residents, which are green card holders, and then there's citizens, right? So if you're undocumented, you have no status, you're the most at-risk group. Essentially, you can be placed in removal proceedings at any time. Really what just stopped most of the 10 to 20 million people from being removed is just enforcement priorities, which can change with the executive branch, with Trump or whoever's president. And then, they can't travel, which most people who are undocumented know that. Once you're here illegally for 180 days, you're subject to a 3-year bar from the United States. 1 year gets you a 10-year bar, right? So, if you're at that point, you usually know not to leave the country. Non-immigrant visas, those are also student visas, right? I mentioned Iranian students. We have a lot of students from Iran and from Pakistan in South Florida and in the United States. This would fall into this bucket, right? This is a temporary status. They have no right to enter the country. So I usually get calls from individuals in the community, hey, I have a visa from the consulate, I should be good to go. And I'm like, no, they can still stop you at the border. So you can get a visa from the US Embassy in Islamabad, but they can still not let you in the country. The CBP has full discretion to stop you at the border. Once you're in the United States, due process attaches, but DLS can revoke visas, and it's a little bit easier to get someone on a student visa removed than it is for a green card holder or a permanent resident. And in general, if you're on a non-immigrant visa, or if you know students, I'm sure we all do, I would tell them right now to exercise caution in actions and speech, because they're under the microscope and they're probably the most at-risk group in our community, because there's a lot of them in general in the Shia community, and they have the least rights, I guess you could say. Next are permanent residents, green card holders. So green card holders are almost like citizens, except they can't take an extended absence from the United States, which means spending most of the year outside the United States. So if you're from Pakistan, and I keep going back to Pakistan because I'm of Pakistani descent, but if you're from Pakistan and you want to spend most of the year in Pakistan, eventually CBP will likely, unless you get permission to do so from the government in advance, will at some point revoke your green card for abandonment, right? Whereas US citizens, we can go back and forth and spend as much time abroad. You can be denied entry in very certain circumstances, which prior to this administration wasn't a concern, but we're seeing these national security reasons being used as excuses more and more. And once you're in the United States, because remember there's a distinction between the border and the United States, mainland United States, due process attaches, but it still technically can be revoked, which is what the Mahmoud Khalil case is about. And then US citizens, you must be let in the country. CBP cannot deny you entry to the country. You cannot be deported. Citizenship, in theory, legal theory, can be revoked. Very hard to revoke. If they go down that route, I expect it won't hold up in the courts. And then, the difference between a citizen and a green card holder is you can vote, you can do jury duty, you can run for office, and you get security clearance for government jobs. Now, for travel, that list we went to, right? So if you are from any of those countries, or you have ties to this country, and I'll even extend that to people who have been on ziyarat to Iraq. So I know Iraq's not on the list. But if you've gone to ziyarat on Iraq, we're starting to see, we have a network of Shia lawyers and we talk, and we're starting to see some pushback on that. So if you're can you go back to the last slide, sorry. If you're a non-immigrant visa holder and you're from Pakistan, if you were born in Pakistan, even if you were born in Pakistan and spent your whole life in Canada, my advice right now is don't travel, don't leave the United States for the foreseeable future. The Trump ban hasn't even really been implemented yet. I checked right before this presentation because there are rumors that would come out today. That list is from a leak to the New York Times. So we don't know what it's going to look like in practice, right? So if you're from Pakistan, if you're from Iran, and you are a non-immigrant visa holder, do not travel. With green card holders, travel, but with caution, and just be prepared for the fact that you might be questioned in secondary screening, which we'll discuss next. And then U.S. citizens, travel as you please, exercise your rights, please. It's your right to travel. Obviously exercise caution, and you can also be pulled in secondary screening, which we'll discuss, and these are some things you should do. Next slide. So some of you have probably got the key 4 S's on your boarding pass, which is secondary screening. You can also get pulled into secondary screening if you don't get that on your boarding pass. It can happen to any one of the categories: non-immigrant visa holder, green card holder, or U.S. citizen. CBP can legally detain you for up to 72 hours, and you have a little chance of attorney representation. Technically, you can be represented by an attorney, but it's going to be very hard to get an attorney in the airport. CBP will take the position that it's not a real detention, that they're just questioning you, and they'll try to deny access to attorneys. So if you're in this situation, you're usually going to be on your own, and that's why it's important. If you're going to pay attention to one slide, pay attention to this, especially if you're not a U.S. citizen or you have relatives that travel that are not U.S. citizens. When questioned, if in doubt, remain silent. So answer basic questions. Where are you coming from? Coming from Pakistan, coming from Dubai. That's fine because it'll just irritate the officers. But if they're like, who did you see? Just, when in doubt, it's always better to keep your mouth shut. And that's going to be the theme throughout this presentation, right? I see a lot of people, they take the position that just being honest and forthcoming with the government is going to be helpful. But, I've seen it backfire more times than not. And they'll use it against you. And, some of these officers are really out to get people. Cell phones can be taken. So remember, we discussed expectation of privacy, right? So whether you're a U.S. citizen or a non-immigrant visa holder, they can technically take a cell phone at the border. The Supreme Court's held that there is no expectation of privacy at the border. So if me and you are walking outside the masjid, the cops can't just come and seize our belongings, right? Because we have protections for that. They need a warrant to seize it. However, at the airport, they can. So you don't have to give them your password, but if you don't give them your password, they'll probably confiscate your phone and scan your phone. And what does that mean in practice? Just when you're traveling, make sure there's nothing that would raise red flags in your WhatsApp chats or in your Instagram chats. I had someone suggest that they travel with a dummy phone, like especially if they're going to a place like Iraq for ziyarat, just something to consider. Because even if you're a U.S. citizen, they can ask for your password. You say no, as you should, exercise your right. But then they might take your phone and they screen it. They have software that essentially screens it. And the only way we can see what's in there is we do what's called a Freedom of Information Act request. Don't sign anything, all right? So that sounds obvious now, but when you're in detention or you're being questioned for 5 to 6 hours, and they're like, hey, listen, and they'll lie, and we've seen them lie, and they'll say the only way to get out of this is if you sign this paper. Don't sign it. I have seen in multiple cases, both within our community and outside our community, CDP make up statements, and it's a lot harder for us to do our job if you sign something saying you said something, even though you didn't, than if you didn't sign something, right? And so they'll lie to you, especially if you're a U.S. citizen or green card holder. They say, sign this, it's the only way to get out, or you've been questioned for 5 hours, maybe you're hungry, thirsty, maybe you have your kid with you, they're getting restless. You take a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain. And if you're a non-immigrant visa holder, they can still turn you away and send you back to your country, but again, we can reapply for a visa, but if you sign to something or saying that something that makes you inadmissible, then that's a lot harder, right? So just remember, don't sign anything. And if someone is community, I've had a few people reach out that they're getting questioned repeatedly, it's every flight, they're getting pulled aside, ask the same questions, talk to me after this and I can walk you through a process. You don't necessarily need a lawyer for it, but I can at least guide you through the process. There's a way to remedy things with TRIP. We had a CEO of a large hedge fund who kept getting pulled over. He wasn't even of Muslim descent, essentially mistaken identity, and we were able to remedy that with CBP, and I think we can do the same for many in our community. And then again, to reiterate, U.S. citizens must be let in. 99% of permanent residents are let in, but that may change if CBP gets more discretion, and non-immigrants are up to CBP's discretion, right? So they can, if they don't like your face, they don't have to let you in if you have a valid visa. Next, okay, warrants is an important topic. There are 2 types of warrants, all right? And when CBP comes to your house or to your masjid or somewhere, they're gonna tell you they have a warrant, but they won't tell you which kind, right? So the administrative warrant is the fake warrant, essentially. It's a warrant signed by an ICE officer. It doesn't rise to the standard of a real warrant, so they can't enter private places. So if you are approached by an ICE agent or any law enforcement agent, because again, they're co-opting local law enforcement, ask for the warrant, and I'll show you pictures so you can kind of identify it. We're at that point where we have to all be document experts. And administrative warrants, they can detain you in a public area, right? There's a distinction between a public area and a private area. A masjid, well, I have a question for you guys later, but a public area would be like outside your home, the street. Maybe you park on the street and you're walking around, that's a public area. Or you're at Walmart or Publix, they can detain you in a public area with an administrative warrant that has your name on it. And that's usually issued after a final order of removal. And then a judicial warrant is a warrant signed by a federal judge, and it usually details the scope, items to be seized, and persons to be detained. So they have a judicial warrant usually, and those are very hard to get for ICE, so they usually say they have a warrant, but let's say 85, 90% of the time it's not a judicial warrant. And so again, if someone comes up to you with a warrant, exercise your rights, take a look at it, see if it's a judicial warrant signed by a judge, or if it's an administrative warrant signed by an officer. If it's an administrative warrant, it really doesn't have much weight. You don't have to live in your home, you don't have to live in your business, etc. So here's a quick picture, right? So the administrative warrant kind of has ICE's, I'll back up here a little bit, ICE's letterhead. It'll be signed by an ICE officer. On the right, sorry, go back, slide. On the right is a judicial warrant. So this is going to be signed by a judge. Usually this is pretty serious. If they show up to this at your home, they have a judge's permission to enter your home and to search the premise or search your business or search your masjid. Again, 85, 90% of warrants are the one on the left, aka, not real warrants, but we might see an uptick on the warrants on the right, especially, again, for our community. Next slide, please. So remember, before travel, that was about the border, right? That's when you come in. There's a different set of rules when you're in the border. They can take your phone, they can put you in questioning, but once you're in the United States, you have your due process rights attached, and you should exercise that. So ICE can technically show up anywhere, at your workplace, home, school. They can show up at IJA. The Biden administration discouraged ICE from showing up in certain places, such as universities, but it looks like the Trump administration has kind of thrown that discretion out. So again, distinction between public areas and private areas. So public areas are outside your home, your workplace parking lot, outside your gym. No warrant is needed to approach you. They can approach you because it's a public area, as the public can approach you. They can detain you, but only with an administrative warrant. So don't consent to being detained. So if they come up to you, you're outside your workplace, there's ICE agents or there's federal agents, and they're like, hey, can you come with us? I would not consent to that unless they have a warrant. You're asked to see the warrant. If they don't have a warrant, go back, continue with your day, call your attorney, and then move forward from there. They do need a warrant to search you or your belongings. So, any agents, federal agents, state agents can't just come up to you and be like, unless they have probable cause, another whole presentation, but they can come up to you and, hey, can I see your backpack? Or, let me empty your pockets and see if you have your green card on you, right? If you're in a car and you get pulled over, there's no warrant technically needed to stop you, but there is a warrant needed to search the car. Only the driver needs to provide the ID, so not the passengers. And don't answer any questions related to immigration status, and don't consent to a search, generally speaking. And then if the questioning is prolonged, I would request a copy of the judicial warrant. It's just best practice, and ask if you're being detained. Right? Because you got to remember, these officers are always kind of overstepping the boundaries of what they're supposed to do, and if you put them in check, especially if you're a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, and you have the rights attached to put them in check, then I would recommend doing so. Right? That's the only way we push our community forward. Okay, continue. Home. If ICE knocks, don't open the door. Ask to see the warrant and slide it under the door, or at least hold it up to there. Check if it's a valid warrant. With an administrative warrant, no matter what they say, they will push and push and push. They cannot enter your home. This is a sacred space in the American legal system. They need a judicial warrant to enter your home. If it's not a judicial warrant, clarify that you want them to. You don't want them to enter, and then you got to speak with a lawyer. If it is a judicial warrant, they'll enter anyways. But try to prolong them if they have a judicial warrant, and call a lawyer, myself, or a criminal defense attorney, depending on what kind of matter it is, and just see. Usually they'll be kind of reasonable and let you call a lawyer, but not always. Okay, question for the public, or for the crowd. What is IJA? Is it a public or a private space? Private. It is a private space, right? So I'm going to go over in a little bit the next section, workplace considerations, but that also considerations for a masjid like IJ. Just the IJ board, it's best practice to designate a contact person in case ICE comes here. And again, it's not implausible. They've attended masjids before. I don't think we've had that issue in South Florida as much, but in other states, it's happened and it could happen. General tips is do not take what ICE/law enforcement says at face value. Always ask for a warrant. So again, they will tell you and they will push for a warrant. Most of the time they don't have the correct type of warrant, and that is enough to get them to leave you alone usually. Document and record everything. That means get the badge numbers of the officers. If you find yourself in an enforcement action, write down their names, start recording. Everyone has cell phones nowadays. Make sure you record everything. And then carry evidence of status. Technically, non-US citizens must carry their documents at all time. So, carry your green card if you're a green card holder. If you're on a non-immigrant visa, carry your I-94. This is not something that has been enforced in practice that much, but it could be. I mean, the legal justification is there, and if they want to give people a hard time based on that, then they can. And then, if detained, remain silent and contact counsel. And then, you're going to have to move through the court system, but, always, even if you're detained, don't talk. Usually that does more harm than good. And if you're at that point, usually maybe they might have something on you, so it's important that you don't say too much. All right, for non-immigrant visa holders, again, I don't know how many students or F1 students we have in the crowd, but this is something that's very common in the Shield community. We have students from the Middle East and from Pakistan that are studying in the United States. This is the most vulnerable group, and a lot of the arrests you've seen, maybe all of them with the exception of Mahmoud Khalil, are student visa holders, right? And so I'm getting calls and I'm like, okay, so I was at this Palestine protest last year, or I was at this event, what do I do? If you're a non-immigrant visa holder, the best strategy is to be preemptive, because once you're detained, it might be too late. It's very hard to get you out of the system. The government has a lot of discretion to kick you out of the country, right? So, refrain from any public political talk for the time being. We obviously have freedom of speech, but we're having cases that are going through the system right now, the court system right now, that will set precedent, right? And so until that's figured out, it's best to lay low if you are a non-immigrant visa holder. Cleanse your social media. Department of State, it's pretty public now, is doing AI scans of social media. So, they have an AI go through Facebook profiles, Instagram, see who's posting what, and they're using that as justification to revoke visas or to, stop people from entering the country. Cleanse your phone, including WhatsApp, email, and text messages. Highly recommend that. Do not travel if you're from one of the countries mentioned earlier, or if you've recently traveled to those countries. So if you're a Canadian whose parents came from Iran and you're studying in America, and you went to Iran recently, the best advice right now, because again, CBP has full discretion to not let you in the country, is to not travel. Consult with an attorney to get a green card as fast as possible. And then remedies, if you're in any of the situations, if you're not a good visa holder, it's usually an individualized solution, so I didn't spend so much time on remedies. But that can involve reapplying, it can involve federal litigation and administrative relief. Right? So if you have a relative that's in this situation where they have their visa revoked, or they were denied entry to the country, or maybe ICE is giving them a hard time, you can send them my way. All right, the Mahmoud Khalil case, and why should we care, and why is this an important case study here, right? So you guys all, I'm sure, have heard of this case by now, right? What makes this Mr. Khalil different than the rest of the students that were arrested is he's a green card holder. And as such, he has pretty much almost the same constitutional rights as a U.S. citizen, and his spouse is a U.S. citizen. And his unborn child will inshallah be a U.S. citizen, right? So he has never been criminally charged nor convicted, and he was moved from New York to Louisiana without his attorney's knowledge. Now DOS, this is very rare for DOS to detain a green card holder, especially one that doesn't have a criminal conviction or a drug charge or a human trafficking charge, right? That happens, but this is a case where the individual has not been charged. So they're relying upon the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, and there's a foreign policy bar within the act. And it authorizes the government to remove or exclude non-citizens who the U.S. Secretary of State designates as a foreign policy concern or threat, right? And so that should concern us all, because, that's a pretty broad, first of all, that gives Marco Rubio way too much power, and it's a pretty broad power to designate whatever counts as a national security threat, right? And so, if you say something the government doesn't like about Iran policy or even trade policy, potentially, they can take the position, right? And so that's why it's important we watch this case, and see what kind of precedent it sets, because if it's favorable to our community, that's good. That means that, these free speech rights of green card holders and potentially students have been protected, and that you can't just be detained and deported for what you said or attending a protest, right? If it's ruled the other way, then, it's going to be very concerning, because I can see a lot of students from our community who were maybe even a Facebook post or Instagram post, they can get detained and deported potentially for what should be protected speech. Next slide, please. Now we'll go over organization concerns. You can take pictures of these next slides. So this is a presentation we give to our corporate clients. We charge them my hourly fee. You guys are getting it for free. So feel free to take a picture of the slides and take it back to your workplace, because I know some of us, you own businesses, or you are high up at your workplace, or just in general, if you're working somewhere, it's good to know this. And these considerations also attach to the masjid. So, I've tried to change some of that language as well. So, in the event of an ICE raid or I-9 audit, the following steps should be taken by security and front desk manager or whoever has first contact with ICE. So maybe someone sitting outside the masjid. It could be you, right, outside the masjid when ICE shows up. Remain calm. It's always good to tell ICE. You don't want to be combative with ICE off the bat, right? It's kind of a dance, right? Exercise your rights, but you don't want to make them mad. Right? These guys have a lot of power, and sometimes cooperation can go a long way, or at least be giving the air of cooperation. Reiterate that your organization is cooperating with ICE, whether it's IJA or your company, and that you should not appear adversarial / standoffish, right? The organization has nothing to hide. Facility, HR manager, general manager, masjid contact, obtain copies of all documents presented by ICE. So when they come, they'll present documents that gives them the authority to come to this center or to your business. That includes notice of inspections and warrants, and again, we'll go over that in the next slides. If ICE cannot produce copies, I would kindly request that they provide you with documents for inspection, and then scan them to the corporate team. The next step is let ICE know you're checking with your corporate team or your masjid contact or the masjid board, and that you will cooperate with them once you get further instructions, right? Because this is sometimes the average employee or masjid member or IJ member should not be making these decisions. I would send it to the board of IJ or to the board of or to the legal department of your company. Let them review the documents and make a decision on what's the appropriate course of action here. Do we let ICE in the building, or do we keep them outside because they don't have the proper warrant? And then, note the name, whoever got first contact. So if it could be you standing outside the masjid, get the names and badge numbers of the ICE agents. It's your right to do so. They can't really detain you, and if they do, maybe you'll make some money in a lawsuit. But take notes of that, because that's important information for later down the road. Next, please. ICE will generally present two types of documents: notice of inspection, that's going to be concerned more so at a work site, not at a masjid, or a warrant. It is corporate legal / masjid board's job to determine what type of document ICE has provided. And notice of inspection essentially just authorizes ICE to do an I-9 audit. So I'm sure all of you at some point have signed the form I-9 on your first day of work, which is the employment authorization form. ICE audits those all the time. They can result in millions of dollars of fines for a medium-sized organization, and that's why it's important, to upkeep those forms. And then a warrant is produced when ICE wants to detain a specific person or conduct a large-scale raid. And they have issued warrants before for masjids to get a specific person, because that they know that the person regularly attends the masjid, and so it's something we need to be cognizant of. Next, please. Just like with the personal or the individual concerns, ICE cannot enter the private or non-public areas of the worksite masjid without a valid warrant. So, again, this is kind of legal technicalities and gets into legal battle, but what is a private versus a public area of, I would say the parking lot is probably a public area of the masjid, but this is a private area of the masjid, right? So they can't enter the proper documentation. If you are the first point of contact for ICE at the masjid or your worksite, you should not authorize them to enter, right? Because consent, once you give consent, they have a lot more leeway in entering the premise, whether it's your home, your business, or the masjid, right? You should, again, check with the contact person, and maybe we can talk to Jim and the rest of the board and Raza, see who maybe we should have a masjid contact person for these kind of situations, and then, move from there. There are two types of warrants. Again, we went over this: administrative and judicial. I won't go over it again, but the judicial warrant's the real warrant. And then, as noted earlier, copies of the warrant should be immediately provided to corporate or the masjid contact, and I should only be granted entry to the facility if corporate or legal gives you the green light, or the masjid board. But if ICE still tries to come in without a warrant, don't prevent entry. We don't want to fight ICE. Just object to it, say, hey, we didn't give consent, it's not a proper warrant, record, but don't stop them and don't get in the way, because then you can lead to other problems for yourself. Next, please. All right, we'll go over this quickly again. This was Taylor. You can take pictures and take it to your work site. Feel free, please. And if your work site wants more training on this, we're happy to give it. Once you get confirmation from the masjid contact or corporate or legal, you may grant ICE access to the work site. They can enter the facility. Don't block their entry. They should be accompanied at all times. So if the ICE does come to IJ with a judicial warrant, they should be accompanied by someone from the board at all times. They should just be let to walk around the premise. And they should be recorded at all times too, because again, it's going to be your word versus their word, and their word will usually win. But if you have video evidence or other evidence to back it up, in case something goes wrong, it's always helpful. If the raid is a large-scale raid, which again, I don't think is outside the realm, I don't want to be alarmist, but I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities if things keep sliding the way, especially with the Iran sanctions, right? I mean, again, we'll talk about this later, but a lot of the anti-Iran sentiment in the government comes down on Shia communities, and it's just something we have to deal with and we have to understand, and it's, a lot of it's just political. But if a large-scale raid occurs, with many agents, ensure you notify the contact at the masjid. If ICE seizes documents and equipment such as computers or maybe video cameras that we have at IJA, ensure that you ask for a receipt of all inventory. They're required to give you some. And then the judicial one will provide the scope of the search. So it'll say, search, this room of IJA, but not that room, right? Or detain this person, or take this equipment, these computers, and that's it, right? That's all you can take is these certain computers in this room, in security room, for example. If they search outside that scope, remember you're recording them. It's okay to make objections, but don't block them in their search and seizures. Usually that evidence will get thrown out in the court system because it was illegally taken and it wasn't within the scope of the warrant. And then managers / masjid contacts should accompany the agents. They should take notes, and if advised, take video of the raid. With the masjid, with companies, it's better to talk to your HR or legal department, before you start taking videos, because it might erase them. But with the masjid, on the masjid side of things, I would always recommend that you take video, especially, it can only help our community. All notes and video should be provided to the appropriate contact after it's finished. So if you are on the side and you're just a member of IJA and you're recording the whole thing, provide it to a board member so they can, provide it to their counsel. All right, these are things to do in the event of a workplace or masjid raid. Do not attempt to hide any employees or members from ICE or actively obstruct their investigation. Do not divide employees and members of the masjid into groups based on nationality or status, even if ICE requests that you do so. There's, outside of the moral concerns, there's also litigation concerns there. If you are essentially helping ICE impede on someone else's constitutional rights, you potentially open yourself up to a lawsuit as well. Do not force employees or members to speak to ICE agents. So if they come in and they're like, hey, I want to talk to Zain, and hey Zain, can you go into the office and speak to the ICE agents? Again, they have a right to remain silent, and they should exercise that right if they choose to do so. If they want to voluntarily speak to ICE, that's fine, but again, let them exercise their rights. Don't discourage them from seeking legal counsel, as it's their right to do so. Do not answer non-basic questions, as it can be used against you in the organization. If they come here and they're like, okay, what kind of events does IJ hold? Better to remain silent, instead of talking about everything, And not that there's anything to hide, but just an example. If ICE produces an administrative warrant with a specific employee or member's name on it, do not confirm whether the individual is present that day, and do not take ICE to the individual. You are not required to do so, and I wouldn't go above and beyond in doing so. Do protect privileged materials. That's more of a consideration for the workplace. Do request copies of all documents seized by ICE. If ICE goes in, seizes the records from our IJA, we need to get copies of that, and they're required by law to give you copies. Do take notes of all questions made by ICE and all statements made by ICE. Do shut off equipment. Again, a workplace consideration. If you work in a place with a lot of equipment, like a factory or something, then have it shut off. And then you can allow ICE to separate employees into groups, but don't do this for them. Next. Again, after the raid, provide notes, video footage, copies of seized documents, inventory lists, and names of all employees or members detained by ICE to legal counsel or to the board, and they'll provide it to the right people, because this is all evidence. Again, if they're raiding the masjid or you're raiding your workplace, they usually have a judicial warrant, and they're usually building a case, and so this is all evidence that can be used to defend the masjid or your workplace. And then this is again for more so on the workplace side, and you can take a picture and show it to your employers, but yeah, don't talk to the media, and don't post about the raid on the media. Next. Okay, these are so I'm an immigration lawyer again, and these are some of the other general Shia legal concerns. So we have a network now founded after COVID of Shia attorneys. So we talk a lot. We have a group chat. We have some really great attorneys in there, and we're sharing intel, right? So like one thing that just came to my attention is that U.S. citizens who have global entry, which I'm sure a lot of you do, that are coming back from ziyarat are having their global entry revoked, right? They have to let you in the country. You're a U.S. citizen. You have a right to enter the country, but you don't have a right to global entry. And so we're seeing that kind of action taken already 60 days in. So as I noted a few times in the presentation, Iran-U.S. relations is really going to affect how our community is viewed, right? And with Trump 1.0, when relations with Iran started to deteriorate, we started to see more pushback, especially with the Department of State, against individuals who had traveled to Iraq and Iran. They've always been a little bit weird because the government can be a little dumb on the intricacies of the Muslim community, but somehow they are able to kind of understand that Shias go on ziyarat, and somehow it's connected to Shiism, and then they go to Iran, and then maybe they're doing stuff in Iran. That's, the way they think. It's very, very interesting. For ziyarat, as I noted, we see the global entry issue. Another issue we were seeing a few years ago, we were trying to work with the State Department to work this out, but they really weren't interested in resolving it, was alims, especially non-US alims, so alims from Canada, or alims from India, from Pakistan, from the UK even, that went on ziyarat were getting their visas revoked or denied. Again, Department of State has full authority to do so, but when you're making Muharram plans for your masjid or in general, keep that in mind that we might see an uptick in that. So if you're bringing an Urdu speaker from Pakistan who's been to ziyarat, and most alims I think have probably been to ziyarat, then they might get their visas revoked, and we're starting to see that policy from Trump 1.0 kind of come back already. And then secondary questioning, whether a US citizen, a green card holder, or a non-immigrant visa holder, be prepared for secondary questioning when you come back from ziyarat. They're gonna ask what you did in Iran or Iraq, how long you're there for, did you give money to anybody, right? Answer should be no, and we'll get into that with khums. Communications, cell phones, again, they can take that at the border, so be smart. Also, keep in mind that if US-Iran relations continue to deteriorate, they might be watching WhatsApp groups or Instagram groups, and I'm sure we're all doing, we're all saying the right thing, but everyone has a friend sometimes that sends a video that, can get you in trouble, so be cognizant of that. When you're traveling, be cognizant of that. They might get their hands on that, and it's very easy for them to get their hands on that, especially when you're coming in from an international flight. Khums. One of the things the Shia group of lawyers was doing is a few years ago when or I guess more than a few years ago with Trump 1.0, when they enacted sanctions on certain entities associated with Imam Raza alayhi salam's shrine, they inadvertently enacted sanctions on organizations that people were giving homes to. And so there was a big case in Houston where an individual from the Pakistani community was collecting money and giving it to the shrine in the normal course of business, and was essentially caught up in this huge sanctions case. And so just moving forward, be very aware of who we're giving money to, do a little due diligence on the organizations you're giving money to. Not that they're not doing good work, and there's good organizations that get sanctioned all the time. It's not that sanctions make them a bad organization, but you as an individual can get in trouble if you're sending your money, right, to the wrong place. And, they'll make examples of you, and we saw that in Houston. There is a helpful tool under OFAC, which is the Office of Foreign Assets Control under the Department of Treasury. They have a sanctions search, so you can do a search for organizations and individuals, and if they don't directly show up on there, they're usually good. And then again, traveling with, I meant to say cash, that was a typo, but traveling with cash, always be cognizant of traveling with cash and, giving money out when you're abroad. You don't want to inadvertently give money to a sanctioned entity, especially if you're in ziyarat in Iran, or if you're traveling to Lebanon, and you give organization to maybe a masjid or an organization that is on a U.S. sanctions list, you would never know, and there's no bad intentions with it, but it happens, right? And so when you're coming back for questioning, they're like, okay, how much cash did you leave with? How much are you coming in with? Where did that cash go, right? So just be smart, and remember, you can remain silent. All right, in general, masjid 501c3 status, we have obligations, so we all have a responsibility to maintain and protect the masjid. There's only so much programming the masjid can do without getting scrutiny, and just, we have to adopt to the times, right? So with the Biden administration, maybe we can be more lax in what was said at a masjid. Now we have to be a little bit more cognizant of that, right? Because masjids, especially with the Iran relations, are going to be under the microscope. We've seen it before, we saw it after 9/11, we saw it with Trump 1.0, and so that's a very real possibility. So just remember, if you can't stay static, just move with the times and with the tensions. Job termination. So this is, again, I don't practice employment law, but we have had attorneys in the community have great success in getting recourse for people that were terminated for speech, like pro-Palestine speech, especially if your workplace is allowing pro-Israel speech and you get terminated for saying something pro-Palestine. You may not always have recourse, and so it's important that we set you up with the right counsel, and that's what that's about. Contact me. I'm part of AMBA. AMBA is a Shia Bar Association. We've really been working hard to build it and build a network of Shia lawyers nationally. We have great lawyers. We have former government lawyers. We have people in some of the biggest law firms, and we also have nonprofit lawyers. So it's a good coalition of lawyers that are all believe in the cause, and that we try to keep business in the community. So if there's an employment case, we can try to link you up with someone who handles. And it does. Muslim representation matters. My pro bono practice is almost entirely Shia asylum seekers. And I'm not trying to toot my own horn here, but I think I'm able to represent them and get the approvals in ways that a non-Shia or non-Muslim lawyer couldn't. Because I can tell you, the whole history of the Hazaras in Afghanistan, and how half the population was killed in the 1800s, or the history of the Saudi Shia, right? and some of the intricacies of the discrimination and killings they faced, right? And it's just someone not from our community wouldn't be able to do that. And that extends to other areas of law as well, not just immigration. So on the employment law side, having a lawyer from your background always helps, because this is something we grew up with. I could tell you about Shia oppression because I grew up knowing about it, because my dad made me aware, my grandfather did. It's not something I have to research, right? Whereas if I'm researching, the oppression of a certain ethnic group in Thailand, that's a little bit harder. That's me starting from scratch. So again, Muslim representation matters. And then looking forward as a community, I'll end with this. I think it's important to have mentorship, right? In the legal community, we're not as established as, the medical community, for example. We have a lot of Muslim doctors. There's not a lot of Muslim lawyers, especially post October 7th. It's been a very hostile, especially in the large law firms, environment to be in. So we've sought each other out. And so, if you see someone, whether you're a business owner, if you have a contracting business, if you have a plumbing business, if you have a financial firm, give time for mentorship, because, this next generation, they're very fierce. Like I'm not that old, but I'm not that young anymore. But anyone under the age of 27, those kids are, mashallah, they're smart and they're very passionate, and they are very down for the causes, I'd say. So give them a chance and help them build their professional career, and learning from fellow Shias or Muslims is always helpful. And then institution building is the last thing I'll talk about. We often compare ourselves to the Jewish community and some of the institutions they have. But we forget that peak Jewish immigration in the United States was 1880 to 1920, so they have about a 100-year head start on us in building these strong legal institutions that we see, where they can, this lobbying groups where we can see where they can get American students locked up, right? So we are that generation, right? We'll probably never get to enjoy the fruits of that labor, but focus on, if you have free time, it doesn't have to be with a specific institution, but if you're a lawyer, work with AMBA. If you're a doctor, or work with the Imamiya medics, right? We have so many great Shia organizations coming up right now, for every kind of interest, for every niche, that, I think it's very important that, we start building those up for our kids and our grandkids. And last slide. So, any questions? Yeah.
Now, if somebody's on a green card, and so the green card is approximately 10
Hang on, let me, Zain, I'll get the other mic. Can you some mic? Thank you very much.
So the categories that you had for
Yep.
the immigration. So the temporary visas, the undocumented, the green cards, and the citizens. So for the green cards, they typically last 10 years.
Correct, most do.
So if somebody's approaching the expiration of the green card, is it recommended for them to renew or to apply for citizenship? Do you get it?
So yeah, the question was if someone's approaching the end of a 10-year green card validity, is it better to renew or to go for citizenship? Right now, I'm recommending, if you're a green card holder, go for citizenship. Especially if that option's available. Again, there's just rights that attach to you when you're a citizen that just still don't attach to you when you're a green card holder. There's benefits, mostly tax benefits. Sometimes depends on being a green card holder. But if you have the ability to get citizenship, if you don't have criminal history or anything that would be a problem on the citizenship application, I recommend citizenship. It just, you have full rights to enter the country, you have full due process rights, there's no denaturalization process that's really effective right now.
And there are no reports of citizenship being denied just for...
No, you can't have it denied. I mean, it's, and even there's reports now of the U.S., at least in Miami, of ICE being at naturalization appointments and scooping people up, but that's usually if you have what I call a red flag. So, if you do think you have one, talk to me again and we'll discuss it. And for that reason, there might be strategy to stay on a green card because you don't want to be on the government's radar by filing something. But if all else is free and clear, it's very unlikely to get the citizenship, at least not now. We haven't seen the personnel changes in the local office really affect the processing of citizenship yet. That might be the case in a year or two, and maybe, another reason to get it done sooner than later.
Any advice about wiring money to foreign countries, Western Union? Any advice about wiring money to foreign countries via Western Union and other?
Yeah, again, this is not so much my area. That would be more international trade, but general rule of thumb: if you're wiring to an organization, use the OFAC search. So if you just Google Department of Treasury OFAC, they have a search, so you can make sure that entity that you're wiring to is not sanctioned. And then other than that, Western Union is pretty compliant with a lot of the laws that govern international finance transactions. So usually it's not going to be an issue in of itself.
What citizen with the global entry rights?
Clearance, and if they get subjected for detention for one reason or the other, or they don't have any reason at all, do they have the right to make a phone call to their attorneys?
Yeah, they do have. ICE will argue that they don't have the right, and especially if it's a few hours, it's unlikely. And you're talking about. Sorry, I missed the first part of your question. Were you talking about a specific category of people?
A citizen who's got a global entry clearance.
Oh yeah. You have the right. Yeah, I mean, they're gonna. The thing with the short detentions is ICE. Again, they're not always honest. Or sorry, CBP in this case. In general, the government's not always honest. Where they'll take the position that it's not a detention, it's just a secondary screening, which is why it's called secondary screening and not a secondary detention. If it stretches on for a few hours, let's say 5-6 hours, then you need to insist on it, remain silent, and say you're not going to say anything without talking to the lawyer first. But yeah, and then at that point, usually they'll fold. But on paper, yes, once you're actually detained, you have a right to call a lawyer.
What about U.S. citizens that are coming, that have traveled to Canada and they're coming back?
What about, they can be pulled in secondary, and U.S. citizens can be pulled in secondary screening at any point. They have to let you in the country. Now that's the difference between a non-immigrant visa holder and a U.S. citizen, right? Like the non-immigrant visa holder who's on an H-1B or who's on a student visa can be taken to secondary and then turned around and flown back to the country. They have to let you in the country as a U.S. citizen, which is another reason to get citizenship sooner than later.
Zain, sorry, the reason you said people do call their attorneys and don't say anything. But can you share some numbers with us, like who to call? Majority of flights from those countries come at night, so if that something happened, who should we call?
If you're IJ, you can call me. Give me a call.
I mean, you want to share your number?
Yeah. It's 954-348-9282. And again, I'm usually okay with people WhatsApping me or and if I don't handle that area, let's say because I don't do deportation defense. So if you're in ICE custody, then we'll get you, good. My recommendation is always don't get an attorney off the internet. You get a pretty mixed bag, but the best way to get is personal recommendations. So if you're having a specific issue and maybe you were pulled aside because there's also some kind of money issue or a sanctions issue, then we'll make sure we get you the right, right counsel.
Is that your number? You want to share other numbers like Amba? You said another.
Yeah, Amba's. I'm usually the contact for Amba down here. I don't think we have a number yet. We have an email address, but it's not always the quickest. So again, to get through to Amba, it's probably best to contact me because I'm in the Amba chat. I was on the first e-board. I have connected with.
Any backup numbers? Let's say you're not.
Sure. Yeah, I can share in the chat. I don't have one with me right now, and I have to kind of ask for somebody's permission. If they're cool with me giving the number to the community. And we just don't have a lot of Shia lawyers down here. We have, I think 5 now. And I'm the only one that does immigration. Hassan Uncle does IP law, and we have the others do real estate in different areas of law. So. But in terms of, I would get CARE's number too. I think CARE can be very helpful in these situations. They're a non-sectarian organization, so they'll help Shia Sunnis, and they actually do a great job. They're light years ahead of AMBA, which is a Shia bar.
Now, I was saying that most people that they have permanent residence, but they come from high-risk countries like Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, Syria. But don't they also get impacted if they have citizenship?
No, because once you're a U.S. citizen, you're kind of looked at as a citizen of the United States when you enter the United States, and not so much as a citizen of your country, right? So until you get that U.S. citizenship, you're a Venezuelan national or you're a Cuban national. But once you get that U.S. citizenship, you're a U.S. national. A good question.
Have you heard of any instances people being questioned or detained at the local traveling, domestic traveling?
No, well, actually, there's been some news stories about Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is in the United States. So technically, the Supreme Court's found that ICE can actually do checkpoints within 100 miles of the U.S. border. So they can't set up smack dab in the Midwest and set up a checkpoint and check immigration, but they can anywhere in Florida because technically we're within 100 miles of the U.S. border. And so that's something that takes a lot of manpower. We haven't really seen that yet. We saw that with Trump 1.0. Again, answer basic questions. If you're a U.S. citizen, you don't have nothing to worry about. If you're not an immigrant visa holder, have your status documents, and you should be fine. But domestic flights, the only one I've really seen in the news is in Puerto Rico, and because it's an island. I guess that's why they've decided to set up shop there first.
So if you're a student and you're stopped or detained by ICE and they ask you your immigration status, do the students have to answer that, or they should stay silent?
Depends where. If you're at the airport and you're within 100 miles of the U.S. border, you are required, and they can detain you if you don't answer that. Anywhere else, then no, you don't have to answer that. Thank you.
One more question. U.S. citizens that are entering from Canada because the immigration is done in Canada. So they can do the secondary, whatever.
Oh yeah, I mentioned that I've seen CBP make up lies on these transcripts, which is why I was saying don't sign something. That happened in Nassau, Bahamas, one of these prominent cases. So I had a Colombian Canadian national. She was flying from, she was engaged to a hedge fund manager, so pretty well educated woman, and she was flying from Bahamas to Miami. And Nassau is like Canada, where they have pre-clearance in the Bahamas. She was detained there for I think 7 hours. She had an anxiety attack, needed medicine. She essentially signed a statement that said things that she didn't say, and that was really, it's been difficult getting that overturned or getting that fixed because she signed a statement, right, just to kind of get out of the situation. So yeah, in Canada they can do it as well, and this particular case is a very identical situation in Nassau, which like Canada has a pre-clearance, what they call CBP pre-clearance.
I just made a U-turn because I was, but anyhow, one last question.
Sure.
Are you U.S. citizens living abroad for a certain length of time? You said there is no limit, they can live as long as they want.
Correct.
Now they're making a U-turn, coming over here for a visit, whatever may be the case. They have nothing to worry about, is it?
Yeah, they have full constitutional rights to enter the country. The CBP cannot deny them entry to the country, and we have not seen any cases of that yet. Doesn't mean that you'll get a zealous officer down the road, but you cannot legally.
Unless they have a judicial stamp on it, say, to bar them or whatever.
No, even then, as a U.S. citizen, you have to go through due process before you get denaturalized. The only way to kind of detach those citizenship rights is to get denaturalized, and that's a very lengthy process that honestly hasn't been done, in a wide scale way in decades, maybe 100 years. So that, yeah, as a citizen, you're good.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
But can they be subject to secondary?
Yeah, citizen, anybody can be subject to secondary. Again, the border, your detention / privacy rights are different at the border versus what we'll call in mainland America. The airport is the border, right? That's why they can take your phone at the border, even if it's a U.S. citizen, and they can scan it because you don't have the same expectation of privacy.
Do you have any business card that you get that?
I do not. I'll share it in Ansar's. Instead of arguing tonight, I'll share my business card in Ansar's. But yeah, I'll share it.
Let's do this. Why don't you write your number on a notepad and we'll share it.
Yeah, sure, I'll do that. And then I don't know if there's any questions on ladies' side, or if you can come here.
Do ladies have any questions?
If they take your phone, it's better to open it, give it to them, or just deny?
It's a judgment call. I mean, at the end of the day, I would say majority of the time that you don't give them the password, they'll probably take it if they really want it, and then they'll hold it for a few days and they'll scan it. And that's why, if there's something that you don't want on your phone, I would travel with a dummy phone. But, it's at the end, like I personally, I'll fight them all day on this. And I use I've actually asked for my phone before, and I've used the attorney-client privilege because it's my work phone, and I'm adverse to the government, and, this is protected by attorney-client privilege. But, as a non-attorney, you don't really have that privilege. So at the end of the day, it's just how much trouble you want to cause, and, they're probably going to give you a phone anyways, but I think I'm a big fan of exercising your rights if you have them.
So you prefer the spot?
Yes, the cruise. So when they check, when customs checks you're from an international cruise or you're going to the Bahamas, yeah, that's considered the border. So same thing. The border is not the southern, northern physical border. It's the airport, it's the seaports, any place where you were what's called entered and inspected in the United States.
Ladies, I have a question.
Okay.
When you come back from the cruise, there's a passport thing that scans your face.
Yeah, they do that at airports now too. Yeah. You can still put it. Yeah, it's a border.
I have a question. I'm traveling to Europe in April.
Sure.
On my passport, I have multiple visas of Iraq and Iran and Saudi Arabia. So would I be I'm a citizen, but I just want to know what should I do.
Yeah, I mean, you might get questioned. I mean, again, those specific countries, especially Iraq and Iran, have repeatedly, both during Trump 1.0 and in the last 50, 60 days, been something that just CBP is aware of, that it's a bit different than traveling to other countries, and it draws our attention. So, just be prepared for secondary questioning. Again, they have to let you in. Just if you're in doubt otherwise as to whether you should say something, don't say it, is my advice always. And that's the best you can do. And then again, cell phone. With Ziyarat, it might be helpful to travel with a dummy cell phone, just because I think the chances of them taking your phone is a bit higher. But yeah.
I'm coming back from Europe in April, so I just want to know because my passport is on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance. I would say it's a higher than normal chance. So obviously not a certainty, you can't give certainties, but higher than normal chance of that happening, of that being an issue.
If I'm traveling with my husband, would it be a problem for him?
Yeah, I mean, potentially they can take
He
you.
does not have any visas of Iran.
Yeah, if you guys are traveling together, then yeah, they can take him to secondary as well, potentially. Yeah, and they can take anybody. The courts have found they have full discretion to take anybody. They can see me and not like my face, and all right, I want to question that
So
guy.
do you think it's the wise decision to come separately?
I mean, I don't think it's gonna be that big of an issue where you need to travel separately. I mean, again, the worst you're gonna get is secondary. They have to let you in the country. The worst they're gonna do is take your phone, and then you have to go through some questioning, right? At the end of the day, you have rights here. I know there's a lot of fear about U.S. citizens getting kicked out of the country and not getting let back in. They can't do that. I haven't seen it yet. If it did, it would be a huge loss. Yeah.
If you're bringing cash, like if you're allowed to bring $10,000 or less, right? But so I know you are allowed to bring $10,000, under $10,000 cash right, from overseas. So if you are bringing, I know it's legal, but they can still give you some tough time.
Yeah, they can ask for it. They can ask where you got the cash from. Again, going back to the Nassau case, this individual was also, I think, gambling in the Bahamas, and that's also the cash that she had on him attracted some attention as well and put her in secondary. And so it's something that could draw their attention. That's correct. And especially if you've had travel to the aforementioned countries, you're just naturally going to get under the microscope a little bit harder, and it's all just soft factors. It's not a guarantee, and it's not what we call hard. There's nothing in the law preventing that, but if they see a bunch of soft factors together, that just increases the chances of you being pulled aside for questioning your phone taken.
If you're not traveling from a high-risk country, do they still detain you?
Yeah, I mean, they can put you in secondary. Detention in theory is a different thing than secondary. I call but detention usually means you're going to an ICE facility. Anybody can be pulled aside in secondary. U.S. citizens, green card holders, no matter where you're coming from, whether Bahamas, Colombia, Iraq, Iran, Antarctica.
Zain, one more question. If U.S. citizen, if they decide to, given the current situation, travel to Ziyarat to Iraq and Iran, on the way back, they can give a hard time, or they can
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And I would expect a hard time, and if it doesn't happen, it's good.
But they cannot ban U.S. citizens from entering the country.
No, it is a clear-cut constitutional right. American citizens can come to this country. They cannot stop you from coming to this country. That's why during COVID, you saw Australia not let Australian nationals back into Australia. If you were an Australian national in America and you were studying, you couldn't go visit your family for the holidays. America couldn't in theory implement a practice like that because you cannot stop entry to the United States with your citizens.
Papa. Advance you don't recommend an Iranian citizen advance parole? Yeah. You do not recommend a citizen of Iran with advance parole right now to travel to Iran?
And the advance parole is based on a pending green card application?
Yes.
No, do not. Yeah, I mean, just to be prudent. Again, the ban policy hasn't even been implemented yet, so we don't even know the full. Usually, when a law is implemented, I'll comb through it and look at the language and see how it's. We don't even have that yet, right? It's just a New York Times leak and some rumors. It's going to come. It could happen on Tuesday. It could happen on Monday. We don't know, and so even until we have that certainty, I recommend no travel. And then, if it's extremely limiting, it's going to be battled out in the courts, and after that, a few months, then maybe that opinion will change. But right now, my opinion is if you're in that position, don't travel. No, it's not. It's not safe.
Zain, if asked on the airport, what could be a valid explanation for using a dummy phone, especially with us being in 2025?
Well, you don't have to say it's a dummy phone. I mean, you're not required to answer that question. Just say it's your phone. They'll ask for your phone, and if they say, do you have any other phone? Just say, no, I don't have another phone. That's fine.
Can I add something to that, please?
And just say you buy it, you like to travel with the phone in case it gets stolen.
Yeah, there you go.
Well,
Yeah, you said it. That's what I was saying.
Yeah.
Your good phones can get stolen.
Yeah, just say you like to travel, and if they really, hone in on that point, again, make the judgment call whether to remain silent or keep talking, but, just say you travel with a dummy phone because you don't want it stolen,
Good answer.
Yeah, just,
Would it help your case if you filled your Instagram and Facebook accounts with posts praising Trump?
Maybe this phone background picture might help, I don't know. It could.
I would give them the diaper and just run away.
Yeah, exactly. They'll detain you for sure if you do that.
Can we keep our real phone in our luggage?
Again, they have the right to ask for that. It's a judgment call, so they have the right to ask for that. And I haven't really seen them push the dummy phone. Like usually they'll ask for your phone, like you give them the phone on you, and they don't really question beyond that. If you get an officer that's difficult or maybe a little sharper than the average CBP officer, and they're, hey, do you have another phone in any of your luggage? You don't want to lie to them because maybe they know already, and then you misrepresented the government. That's a judgment call, and it depends what's on your phone and how badly you want to protect the contents of your phone.
They could go back like years, right?
No, they scan it. So what they do is they take it, they'll hold the phone, and they have software that they scan it. And so they essentially have a copy of everything that you sent. And then they'll give you your phone back after a few weeks. I forgot the amount of weeks they're allowed to hold it, but they're allowed to hold it a certain amount of weeks. Give your phone back, and for then on, the government has a record of your phone and everything you've sent and everything in your phone and all your apps, and it's just intrusive, and you don't really want to have that. It's a really bad policy, and I'm hoping at some point someone litigates it and gets it overturned because it's ridiculous. No, they can. They have software. That's why they'll detain it. So if you unlock it, they usually won't take your phone. They'll go through it until they find something. Sometimes they'll take your phone. Again, it just depends on the individual situation and how bad they want it. If you don't unlock it, they will almost certainly take your phone. And so a judgment call again.
I have a question.
Sure.
The question is that a lot of people use applications like Venmo, Zelle, Remitly. Is that information also going to be looked at by folks?
Yeah, I mean they have if your phone's either unlocked or they scan it, they'll have access to information, and whether they want to, again, it's a very individualized situation. So if you're sending a Venmo once or twice a year, it's probably not going to raise red flags. But if you're Venmoing someone abroad in Pakistan, every few days or something, then they might look into that. I went to Cuba once, and I Venmoed a friend money, for I think he covered food because there's no ATMs in Cuba. So I'm taking the money on. So I borrowed some money from him. He didn't think there's no ATM in Cuba. And then I Venmoed in Cuba. I put Cuba in the description like a fool. And I had Venmo close my account for a few days while they listened. Before I was a lawyer, so I wouldn't make that mistake now. But yeah.
Are CUP officers allowed to take money away from you without consent?
Very limited cases. If they have probable cause that it's involved in the commission of a crime, they can confiscate your money as evidence. But it's very and you can usually get it back. But very limited cases I've seen that happen.
The thing is that if you're sending money for a charity or an individual that does some charity work, is that also considered how we can look for an individual?
The best way for you to do your own due diligence is the OFAC search. OFAC handles all the sanctions for the Department of Treasury, right? Department of Treasury usually is the government agency that handles sanctions. At least the most preliminary level of diligence you can do is to do an OFAC. So if you just Google OFAC, OFAC, then you can find the search, and I would search for the name of the charity, and if there's someone who's associated with it, say